Dawnbringer, Book 1, Chapter 6, To the West. Eldarien pulls his pack tight against his back and adjusts the greatsword, now in a leather sheath slung over his shoulder, as he stands in the small yard between the two houses of the Feskar family. It is early morning, just after sunrise, and the air is quite cold, to a degree that is unusual for this time of year, even in the northern reaches of Telmerion such as this. He awaits his kind hosts to see him off as he begins his journey to the west. And as he waits, he surveys the land and the horizon, looking first to the hills that gradually rise inland, subtle but elegant in their contrast to the wide expanse of sea to the east. These hills are dotted with houses, all small and humble, that make up the village of Igni, receding from Eldarien's sight until he cannot see them anymore, cradled among the folds of the land and nestled in the trees that mark the eastern edge of the Carafel woods. After this, he turns to the east and gazes out upon the sea, drinking in its expanse, its beauty, but also recalling its terror, before he bids it farewell one last time. The water glistens and shimmers, blazing with the early morning light, warm in color, but cold in temperature. At this moment, Eldarien is stirred from his contemplation as Morloff appears through the doorway of his house, a small satchel under one arm and a skin of water in the other hand.
"Here's the water that I had Yelia prepare for you,"
he says, handing the skin to Eldarien, who with a smile pulls off the pack that he had just adjusted and ties the water to it.
"It's not much, but it will last you a few days. I don't suspect you will have a hard time finding a creek to refill it,"
Morloff continues.
"And this, too, is for you."
He hands the satchel to Eldarien, who pulls it open and rummages quickly through its contents. Dry provisions for clothes on a fortnight's journey, if used sparingly, and another smaller sack tied with string, in which is a clay jar of oil and some tightly woven cloth, for if you need to travel in the darkness, Morloff explains. Eldarien hopes that he will not need to make a torch, whether for traveling at night or for traversing dark caves in the earth bereft of sunlight, but he is grateful for the supplies and thanks his host. As he ties the satchel closed again, his mind carries him back to the barrow of Seragalaptes once again, and the innumerable candles ever burning before the bodies of the dead rise before the eyes of his heart. Even at a distance of many years, the lights stir in him feelings both of comfort and of trepidation. Would a normal torch stir less fear and more comfort? Or would perhaps its comfort be immeasurably less than the mysterious consolation offered by those lights ever keeping vigil, nearer but less mysterious, and therefore ultimately less able to carry him through the darkest of nights and narrowest of tunnels? He dismisses these thoughts and raises his eyes, just in time to see the rest of the household stepping outside to see him off. The farewell is sober and yet kind, and Eldarien feels the ache of yet another goodbye, keenly aware that this may well be the last he sees this family.
"I wish you all the best in your journey, and in what awaits you,"
Aaliyah tells him quietly.
"I am anxious about the state of our land, but I suppose you shall be safe upon the road and off of it. And may the desires of your heart for good come to fruition."
"Thank you, Aaliyah,"
he replies.
"You truly have my gratitude for everything."
"We shall miss you,"
Mirand says.
"An unexpected friend quickly made is a gift, but it is sad to lose you so soon."
I share in the sadness of parting. But wherever I go, may I be a friend to all I meet on the road, and do good however I may.
I pray that you do not meet enemies instead.
Gilia adds. To this, Eldarien only nods silently, and with a gentle touch on the head of each child and a final gesture of farewell to his hosts, he turns away. As he begins to walk toward the heart of the land of his youth, now wrought with war and conflict, he makes a decision within himself and reaches up and undoes the braid hanging by his right temple. He does not by this intend to betray the oath which he has taken, but the braid that symbolizes the binding of his heart to the ideals of the empire and to its authorities, considering the present circumstances, must be worn secretly within his heart. But this very action, even though by it he means no infidelity, nor even intends to hide his true feelings, makes him feel even more homeless, as if now he has lost not only his childhood home, but even the empire in which he had discovered some sense of belonging and purpose. In response to this, the thoughts rise spontaneously within his heart.
May I never conceal that which ought to be revealed, and never reveal that which ought to be concealed, but in all things walk with transparency of heart and of life.
He takes to the path that runs from the shore past the homestead almost straight west. This road, paved with cobbled stone generations ago and now broken and littered with dirt and weeds, passes through the midst of the houses of Igni and curls its way between the feet of two rocky hills before it begins to gradually ascend from sea level in a gentle yet steady slope. Similar homesteads to that of the Fesca family, perhaps 40 in number, some farther and some closer, each with a look as unique as their inhabitants, dot the landscape, and Eldarien takes them in with his eyes as he passes. He sees a pasture of sheep and hears them bleating as he walks past, and then a logging outpost that churns noisily as he draws near. As he comes to it, he sees that it is powered by a bulky wooden mill wheel, churning up water from a small but fast-moving river that winds its way northeast toward the sea. Eldarien crosses a flat wood-slat bridge not far beyond the mill, and then finds that the path comes to a junction. At the intersection is posted a sign which says, West, Aldera Highlands, Telden Pass North, Melendia, Unisa Pass. Eldarien takes the path to the west and soon finds the houses of Igni receding into the distance behind him, and the forest before him thickening. This forest, Carafel, spreads far inland, rising and falling with numerous hills, but keeping a steady upward rise for many leagues. But after this gradual ascent from the sea, the landscape changes, and hilly woods give way to barren and rocky steppe, cliff and crag and gnarled root, the Aldera Highlands. These highlands await Eldarien, and he knows that he must pass through them, but that step of his journey is still close to a week away, and, even further beyond that, the Teldren mountain range and his childhood home. He has never been this far east to Igni, but passed within 50 miles many years ago on the main road that splits the eastern part of Telmerion north to south, connecting Galliard and Clarishy in the north with Ristfand in the south. Trade has become a large part of Telmeric culture in the last few generations, since the establishment of the Onarian and the harmony of the 7 clans. Most of the roads that traverse the landscape of Telmerion date from this period, and thus are still young roads in comparison with the ancient trails that wend their way across fields and through forests, that crawl through valleys and traverse cliffs and mountains. Even in ancient days, however, 3 great roads were established, and through decades of human labor were in differing manners paved and marked with way stations or way shrines. There is the great Teldin Road running east to west or west to east, from which comes the name for Telden Pass, and both in fact take their name from the 2 mountain ranges between which the road traverses. the Teldren Mountains in the north and centre of Telmerion, and the Yend Mountains in the far south. The second road, the Mardas, passes from the town of Clarisier in the north and around the east end of the Teldren Mountains, and then south, the entire length of the continent, to Ristfand. This road has often been used for trade from north to south, and even to this day is part of the route when persons or supplies travel from Igni and other towns on the east coast to the far west, even to Brughill. The third road passes from Brughill in the northwest reaches of the continent to the centre of Telmerion and meets up with the Teldin Road just south of Onilanden. The name of this is Finistra Road, and it continues for a long stretch along the Finistra Range, a wide expanse of low mountains and hills that reach along the centre of the continent until meeting with the greater, lofty peaks of the Teldren Mountains. Both of these mountain ranges together give the landscape of Telmerion the appearance of a great mountain rising from the sea, like a conical volcano thrust upward above the waves, yet with innumerable peaks of different heights and splendours, and on all sides descending into lower mountain ranges or hills, or even plains, which then plunge into the ocean. Of unique beauty, and an exception to this conical nature of Telmerion, are the mountains in which Brughill is nestled, which drop off straight, in cliffs hundreds of feet above the sea, into icy cold waters that ever splash against the vertical walls of rock. Another unique exception is the Yend Mountains, which grow close to the ocean and reach their roots right down into the narrow strip of rocky land that has been shaped by the water and yet stands ever against it, unmovable and strong. But there are many other noteworthy landmarks at the meeting of land and ocean, as if this kiss of land and sea can never be exhausted in its glory and its depth, and all across the land the same theme is hit with a different key or sung to a different tune. Eldarien has only seen some of them as much as he has travelled, for his journeys have taken him mostly across the inland of the continent. He has been, however, to Brughill in the northwest, to Ristfand in the south, and to Galayad in the northeast. The 7 clans of Oldmark off the land of Telmerion into 7 segments, unequal in size, but equal in wealth of resources and bounty of beauty. These clans have nonetheless become more similar to one another as time has passed. In particular, a great deal of their uniqueness has not survived the flattening effect caused by the control and presence of the Empire. They still retain some unique cultural customs among themselves, and each also has a form of governing structure of their own under the headship of the clan leader, still frequently called a Heras from the ancient tongue, but they are nothing like what they used to be. Unlike in more highly developed and centralized societies, such as the Empire of Valyria, the borders between the clans are unfixed. In the past, this was a point of great contention and the cause of much bloodshed, with ownership of lands and peoples continually passing hands through force of arms more than through any diplomacy. Since the coming of the Empire, however, bloodshed has given way to peaceful, if at times tenuous, coexistence and even, in the most positive circumstances, cooperation. The 7 clans are named as follows, with their areas of dominion upon the land of Telmerion. In the far northwest lies the clan of Brewer, and to the east and a bit south of that, centred in Minstead, the Mineas. Across the mountains, and in the centre of the continent, resides the clan of Winfreya in their capital by the same name, the only settlement of any significant size in their domain, yet circled about with innumerable little villages and hamlets. Northeast of this, occupying the northernmost reaches of Telmerion, lies the clan of Germundis, and further south, across a stretch of outlying mountains reaching east from the great range of Teldren, is the clan of Galaptea, in which Eldarien is now located, and which covers a great expanse of land, sparsely populated and yet rich in wood and fish and ore. from Igni in the east along the coast to the side of the Teldren Peaks in the west, including Eldarien's lost hometown of Falstead and the barrow of the ancient king Sera-Galaptis. The remaining two clans inhabit large stretches of land in the southeastern and southwestern reaches of the continent, with the clan of Rovus claiming all lands of the Yen Mountains and eastward, and the clan of Onilandis claiming the lands west of the mountains, including the Midfeld stretch and southwards along the great forked peninsula to the sea. Thus is divided the land of Telmerion, marked by centuries of warfare, in the lust of men for power, in violence against the weak, only to have these very conflicts overcome and brought to cease in a form of coexistence by an unquestionably more supreme power from beyond her own shores. What remains to be said of the lands that call themselves Telmerion, blessed by the god Telmuth from the beginning of time, and ever caressed by the waves of Hyliana, is that two more clans reside beyond the borders of the continent, in outlying chains of islands. They are rarely counted among the rival clans, and live an existence apart, linked to the mainland only by a meagre amount of trade, and an even smaller degree of settlement, and the linked lineage that this induces. Thus, the clan leaders have their own completely independent forms of government, and have no part in the Onarian, the Council of the Seven. Of all places in Telmerion, they alone are free from the occupation of the Empire, or so it is understood by those living on the mainland, as few have travelled thence and returned. These clans are, to the east of the land, the Teresta, and to the northwest, the Neria. The day warms slightly as Eldarien walks through the woods, and the spring sun dances through the trees and casts speckled rays of light upon the ground, interlaced with shadows of branches and leaves. The walk is tiring simply because of the continual rise and fall of the land, undulating up and down even as the land as a whole progresses ever upward. The path winds very little and only rarely weaves its way between hills, instead traversing them almost without exception in a straight westerly direction. Trees long ago were certainly hewn and dug up to make way for the path, but now they have grown close again and overhang the trail, sometimes with branches hanging so low that Eldarien must duck under them to continue on his way. The air is still, with only hints of breeze whispering through the trees and causing the thick grass on either side of the path to gently sway. Spring is beginning to make her face known in the woods, with many trees in early bud and a few in full bloom, and flowers beginning to unfold themselves, the few flowers that there are in a climate such as this. Eldarien wonders at the state in which he finds the forest, since it is not as he expected. Spring should already have long been in full blossom and leaning already towards summer, and yet here everything looks as if it has been a couple months delayed, hesitant to leave behind the slumber of winter and to welcome the new flowering of life, and yet, after a prolonged hesitancy, yielding to it at last. He stops briefly around midday and sits upon a fallen ancient tree, drinking a bit from the water skin and eating some bread and dried fish. As he sits, he thinks, letting his mind wander back, not now to the long-buried memories that stirred to life beyond his control while he stayed in Igni, but to other memories whose import for the present and the future weigh upon his heart. He finds himself again in the courtyard of a castle of high stone walls, the late morning sun glistening overhead, crowds of people standing about, and his brothers in arms to his left and his right. After years of training, they now stand, squires, before the honour of knighthood, in regal garb, and the legate of the emperor stands before them, with an assistant to his side.
After the time of trial comes the glory.
The legate begins, in a booming voice clearly intended to be audible to all in the crowd, as well as to the men standing before him.
You have shown yourself worthy through service to those placed above you, and through might of arms and strength of will. Now before you stands the glory of knighthood, and if you continue upon the path you have chosen, the glory of battle. I approach you now and speak to you all as one, but each must answer for himself alone.
With this, the legate takes a step forward and turns to his assistant, who hands him a sword.
You are to profess your oath of allegiance before me, who stand in the place of our great emperor, and before all of the people gathered here. May curses befall you on the day you break such an oath, endangering thus the well-being of the order which you have vowed to protect and uphold.
The legate now approaches the first squire in line and gestures for them all to kneel. When they have done so, he places the sword against the squire's shoulder and says,
Do you vow this day to honour in all thy acts and words the glory of the Empire of Valyria, and to obey without question the commands of thy superiors, as if they were the words of the Emperor himself, highest of men and custodian of goodness?
The squire replies,
I do.
Moving the sword then to the other shoulder, the legate continues,
In the name of the Emperor, I accept thy profession. Remember always thy oath and honour it, for only in this way, may it be known unto thee, shall thee be of service to those values to which thou hast committed thyself. Honour, glory, might, the unity among peoples, the order of society and the unyielding arm of the law, which punishes the wicked and pardons the innocent.
The image now changes in Eldarien's memory, and he finds himself carried in thought to the more recent past. He stands guard at the edge of a military camp in the wilderness of Telvelfana, a group of tents hidden among the trees. A voice sounds from behind him, and he turns.
Captain, may I have a word with you?
You may,
He replies,
but come stand beside me, for I must be able to keep watch.
Of course.
The soldier does so, and after a moment he continues.
I wanted to ask you about the orders we received yesterday.
It is not a soldier's place to question orders.
Eldarien says.
What about a captain's?
The soldier says, his voice audibly constricting. Eldarien turns to look at him, startled.
What is this you are suggesting?
I suggest nothing.
But surely you do.
Well, surely you do not intend to follow through with the command given to us? To slaughter the enemy even if they surrender and to chase them to the death were they to flee?
They would do the same to us were they given the chance. There is no place for such mercy with an enemy like this,
says Eldarien.
Do not make me regret sharing my orders with my subordinates. I have always acted in the belief that even the lowest foot soldier should be privy to the commands given to his leaders, since he too will be forced to stand with them in battle.
Eldarien pauses and sighs deeply.
But if it means insurrection,
Why share with us, if you are not willing to listen to us when we have questions, or do not understand the purpose of our orders?
Eldarien does not immediately reply, touched by the soldier's courage and by the strength of emotion with which he speaks.
Aye.
He begins, but falters.
I too have questions, Leric, but I've professed an oath. We all have. We have no choice but to obey.
The image changes again, and Eldarien finds himself 2 days later standing upon the battlefield, sword and shield in hand. The cries of battle falter around him as the last survivors fall at the edge of his company's swords. Victory has come, and the threat has been annihilated, utterly crushed under the superior might of the Empire. Before long, surely the lands of Telvelfana too will surrender and allow themselves to be incorporated into the order that the Emperor brings to all lands that accept his reign. But what will remain of these lands when they surrender? Who will survive to accept such a reign? And of those who survive, what of their own culture, their own way of life, their own traditions? As he looks across the battlefield, stained with blood and littered with the bodies of men from both armies, these thoughts cross Eldarien's mind, but he suppresses them.
To me,
he cries as loudly as he can.
We are victorious. Let us gather what we can for our uses and bury all the dead.
Then he lowers his gaze, drawing out a cloth from his belt, and wiping the blood from his sword, then sheathing it in its scabbard at his waist. As he does so, his eyes fall upon a figure on the ground near to his feet. Eyes stare unseeing upwards, and blood stains the lips and the nose and trickles down the cheek. An arrow lies deep in the man's chest, right at the junction of his mail shirt. Death was certain, but not immediate. The man is Leric. "6 days into his journey, Eldarien comes upon a house in the woods. The path winds around the curve of a hill and cuts its way through a thick grove of trees before passing along the edge of a clearing. Eldarien almost passes by himself without noticing anything, since the house is on the far side of the clearing, about 50 yards off, and largely concealed by the sloping land of the hill and a few willows whose weeping branches shelter it like drapery. He intends to pass on without stopping until he sees near to the house, glistening softly in the dappled light cast through the trees, a small pond, and on its bank squats a man, fishing or washing perhaps, though Eldarien cannot clearly tell from this distance. Nearly out of water in the waterskin, and the river having turned away northwards days ago, Eldarien decides to approach and make himself known, even only to receive a little water for the journey. And so he does, calling out,
"Hail, friend,"
as he draws near enough for his footsteps to be heard. The man raises his head, surprised but not startled, and then sets down what was in his hands, a small cage woven roughly of branches, and stands.
"Greetings,"
he replies.
"What brings a traveller along this rarely trodden way? The main road is not far from here, but this trail is small and ill-used, for it goes east only to the sea and westward to the highlands with little or nothing to see."
"I pass from Igni, to the west of which you speak,"
Eldarien says.
"My business, I assure you, is one of peace."
"Sadly, not many who travel in the wilderness far from the main roads travel in peace. Exiles, wild men, and brigands, criminals of all sorts, make the woods and the hills their home, and they prey on the weaker, who seek only a simple life among nature's bounty. Could you tell me a bit more of your business, and the reason for approaching a man in the wilderness? Only then may I decide whether to aid you on your way, for I must assume that is why we speak."
"You are correct in the latter,"
Eldarien says softly, now standing only 10 or 15 feet from the man, and trying to manifest nothing but gentleness and welcoming in his bearing.
"I am deeply acquainted with the ways of the criminals who live in the wilderness, as they destroyed my home in years long past. From Falstead I hail, though it has gone decades hence, though I wish now to return to find what I may."
The man's expression visibly softens at this. His trust is not blindly given, but refusing blind trust is not the same as yielding to blind fear and turning away a peaceful man in suspicion that he may be a dangerous one.
"I only approach,"
Eldarien continues,
"because I have run short on water, and know not how near the closest spring or river is, or if rain will come soon. If you grant me that, I shall be on my way."
"You speak kindly,"
the man says with a smile.
"and your bearing is enough to win my trust. I think I shall give you more than that. Come, let us sit that you may rest a while. I will put food and drink before you, and make sure that you are provisioned for the journey when you depart."
With a bow of his head, Eldarien replies,
"I accept your hospitality gratefully."
The man picks up the cage that he had set down upon Eldarien's approach, and the latter sees that it contains a catch of inland crabs crawling around and nipping their pincers. The man raises the cage as if to exhibit them and says,
"The deep underground spring wells up right here and nourishes many little creatures. That is why I settled here."
The inside of the house is small and dark, yet cozy, with wood-panelled walls and a thatched roof on thick beams of pine. A small fire burns gently in the hearth and casts rays of red-orange on the walls and the objects in the room. Two beds rest near to one another in the corner, and beside one of them a sitting chair of woven grasses, and on the other side of the room a kitchen and pantry area with boxes, barrels and other storage, and a large basin of water for washing and cooking. The man grabs another chair that sits against the wall and sets it near the hearth. He gestures for Eldarien to sit while he grabs the woven chair from beside the bed and sets it opposite his guest. Then he sits down as well.
My name is Roderick Fariel,
He says,
It is a pleasure to meet you.
The pleasure is mine. My name is Eldarien Elomiel, son of Ierendal of Falstead, though the latter part you already know.
It is good that our clans are no longer at war,
Roderick says.
for I hail from Melendia, and generations of conflict mark our ancient history. But now, as you see, I live in the territory of the Galaptea and have long had my home here. Here I was married, and here bore a child. So if in blood we were ancient enemies, by the location of our homes and the changes of our culture, we are close to clansmen.
I set little stock by the clan in which one may happen to be born, though I take from your words a deep sense of welcome and encouragement. Thank you for this.
If you set stock not by one's clan of origin, wherein do you find the measure of a man?
In the past, a clan greatly influenced one's way of life and was the fabric of our society. Then the divisions were truly real, if at times exaggerated, and not calling for the bloodshed that they excused. But now it seems they border on becoming little more than a name.
That is true.
Roderick says.
The Empire has changed the face of Telmerion, for good or ill. But come, we border on speaking of politics, which could cause division between us before we even become acquainted. What is your answer to my question?
The measure of man.
Roderick confirms.
Precisely.
The measure of man comes from his home. That is the first thing to which my thoughts draw me. We are formed by our home, or by our homelessness. I myself experienced both. For the first 17 years, the village of Falstead was the cradle of my life and my growth. For the rest, homelessness and wandering were the nature of my longing, which birthed a growth of a different kind.
Eldarien pauses and thinks deeply before continuing.
But a man may choose his home, whether his previous home was lost, or if he only seeks to make a new one his own. And this, even more than one's origin, reveals the measure of a man. It lies in the home that he chooses, the home that he himself may create, and also what it is for which he is willing to fight.
You speak openly to one who is nearly a stranger,
Roderick says with a soft laugh.
but you also speak with wisdom. I am glad that I have welcomed you into my home, who have such a reverence for home.
With this, Roderick stands and says,
In fact, there is something concerning that about which I wish to speak. But first, let me offer what I promised and set before you food and drink. Only then shall we continue our conversation.
He then brings out bread and wildberry jam and places it before Eldarien. While his guest begins to eat, he sets 2 pots on the hearth and rekindles the flames within it, throwing on a few more logs. In one pot, he drops some tea leaves of various kinds, and in the other he puts the crabs that he recently caught. Then, taking some bread and jam for himself, he sits down again. The 2 men sit in silence together for a while, eating and listening to the crackling of the fire. When the water comes to a boil, Roderick pours them both cups of steaming tea. Only then does he begin to speak.
You may have noticed,
Roderick begins,
that I am alone. Neither my wife nor my child are here. Of course, there is nothing odd about that at my age. My wife, you see, has passed on into Melengthar's embrace a half-decade past. My son, Rorlane, however, it is about him that I wish to speak. You see, he lives here with me and has for most of his life. He is about your age, I suppose, or perhaps some years younger. But not 2 days hence he disappeared while hunting in the woods.
He just disappeared. Did you find a trace of where he may have gone?
Eldarien asks.
Sadly I have.
Answers Roderick.
Or rather I have, though the trace is sorrowful. Before that, however, let me give you a little information that may or may not be news to you. The beasts in the woods, you see, have been acting strange lately. Not the small ones, mind you, but the larger animals, the predators, the bears and the wolves. They have become unusually aggressive and indeed unusually strong. It is as if they are possessed by some power that is not their own, and with this power, an unknown rage. There are many examples, numerous small encounters over the previous months, perhaps the last year. But it seems to be progressing, this change in the animals. Only last week, a bear came into the clearing, crying out in anger as if it were wounded or defending itself. But when we looked out of the windows, we saw nothing causing its rage and its roaring. We waited a while for it to move on, but instead of leaving, it began to destroy the shed that lies near to the house, tearing at it with its claws as if it were an enemy. Wood splintered and flew in the air, and we were startled. It is then that Rorlane grabbed a hunting bow and lifted the pane on the window. A fine shot he is, and he pierced the bear directly in the heart. But to our surprise and fear, it did not die. It did not even fall to the ground. No, it did not even flee. It turned as if to attack us, rearing up on its hind legs and swiping at the air, screaming out in a horrid voice, a bear's voice, but filled with something more terrifying than I have ever heard. It charged, and my son loosed 3 more shots before the bear finally fell to the earth and died with a great echoing cry, and that only a few feet from the open window. Afraid to eat the meat of such an animal, or even to make use of the skins and fur. Fearing it either diseased or cursed, we buried it in the woods. But that is not all. The day that Rorlane disappeared, that morning before he left for his hunt, he brought me out to the bear's burial place and showed me. The grave was empty, dug up, with earth cast this way and that, not by a shovel, but as if by some beast with great claws. I should have been concerned then that something was amiss and forbade him to depart on the hunt, but I did not do so. I suspect there is some greater beast in the forest that feasts upon the flesh of bears, if this was its purpose for digging it up. Whether this is a new creature only lately come into the area or a long-time resident, I know not. For never before have we buried what we have slain, but taken it for our sustenance and well-being, as is only proper. But even so, if the beast were lately nearby and causing the bear itself to act so oddly, if indeed the two things are related, then I suspect it may have something to do with the disappearance of my son.
Eldarien receives all of this in silence, with heart both grieved and unsettled. After the old man's words are concluded, he says,
I am greatly sorry for the losses you have suffered, of your wife and now your son, though I pray the latter may yet return to you.
Thank you, as do I.
In which direction did your son depart on his hunt?
To the northwest. We are not far from the highlands, and many elk live along the edge of the forest. We usually walk northwest until coming to a small river or stream, the first we come upon, and follow this to the place where the forest meets the highlands.
Would you like my assistance in finding your son?
Eldarien asks.
It is too much of a request to make, and too dangerous, I fear.
Roderick sighs.
Surely you share what has happened, not only to let me know of your situation, but also because you wish for my aid.
That is true, but...
No, please, I offer my assistance freely. I wish to help you discover the whereabouts of your son, though I warn you that I may find something that brings greater grief, or confirms it.
I understand and expect as much,
responds Roderick.
But still I wish to know. I cannot just leave things as they are. I myself have travelled far both days since he left and found nothing, and I am old and weary from the journey of life. There is little I can do, and a long journey through the wilderness on a tenuous search is beyond me.
Then I'm glad I came by when I did.
As am I. Your presence has become a sign of hope to me, and I read your coming as provident gift, though I suppose that is yet to be proven true.
I will do all in my power to bring you a conclusion to your search, for good or ill.
It shall be good simply to know, whatever the outcome.
Roderick says,
though clearly my heart is torn with worry for my son, and I wish for him to return in safety and wholeness.